I'm very excited to be here. So Pompeu Fabra is the university where I fell in love with economics. I probably even fell in love with studying and with being in a university. And apparently I liked it, so I'm still at the university, now in Zurich. And I'm focused, like my main research focus is on health economics, in particular child development. But today I want to talk about a topic that is more on subjective well-being. On the one hand, because yesterday I presented child development paper in the CRESS seminar, but more importantly because this paper that I want to talk about has been like quite a long journey. So it started as my second year paper. It was published last year, so much I will already say now. And I really learned a lot about like failing and getting up again and the things that like can come up on the side. And so for the first part of the talk, I want to briefly present this paper, or like the main results from this paper. And since it's already kind of like after lunch, I will do this in a very non-technical way. And afterwards, I will tell you more about the details that went from the first draft to the accepted paper. Okay, so the paper is called Unmet Aspirations as an explanation for the age, U-shape, and well-being. We think of midlife crisis as something kind of like a silly luxury problem that doesn't really matter for most of us in society. However, there has been like some recent research in the subjective well-being literature that suggests that the midlife crisis, or more generally, this midlife dissatisfaction, is a much broader phenomenon. That it's a phenomenon that might hit anyone, even those who have lived most desirable jobs or like living circumstances. And that's important because it's not only causing a lot of pain for the individual and their partners that are then like left, but also it's of course leading to productivity losses for the companies where these people work. However, central questions remain unanswered. The first one is, what are the causes underlying this widespread dissatisfaction that seems to affect so many people in our society? And then, of course, the other question is there anything we can do to help people to better handle these costly episodes? So yeah, as probably many of you know, economists have been becoming increasingly interested in subjective well-being measures. And actually, when I started working on this, somebody like at a conference where I first presented this told me, oh, happiness is dead. So this was like already like a long time ago now, and I think it's more alive than ever. So this statement is definitely true. And a central finding from this literature is the so-called age U-shape, which is the idea that average life satisfaction starts high when you're young, so like in your age, but then bad news, it's like deteriorating, it's going down into like middle ages, but then good news, at the end there's a light at the end of the tunnel, and life satisfaction will increase again. And this U-shape has been documented in many data sets for many time periods, and for already in more than 50 countries. So it really seems to be something quite widespread. So this is, for example, data from Germany. So here we see the age from 22 to 75 and average life satisfaction. So it starts at like, you guys are quite high right now at the moment, but then there will be this nice slide down the curve. But then you will be like between mid-40s, mid-50s, somewhere have a low point, and then it goes up again. And now you'll ask, wait a moment, what's happening here? That's like, why does it end there? And yes, right, unfortunately, at the end it goes down again. But this is, of course, cases where people get like really sick just, you know, like in the final life of years. So this is really like kind of a different phenomenon. And you see that the time series gets noisy here for obvious reasons. Or like the average is there. So overall, it seems that it's kind of like a widespread regularity rather than a misfortune of like a few unlucky managers with too much money. And what's fascinating is if you look at these like U-shape pattern, that you find it for men and for women, you find it across the entire socioeconomic spectrum. So the blue-collar worker has it the same as the overpaid executive, or the mother of four, or the single. You can control for these socioeconomic conditions, and you don't really see that any of these things would explain this U-shape. And this means that this has been like kind of a big puzzle. You know, you see this U-shape, and of course we also have in mind like this is kind of like related to this midlife crisis so many people are interested in society, but we don't know what's going on there. And what I found particularly fascinating is like, if this is something that's so widespread, and it is really important about our lives, right? I mean, because we care about being happy, and if we are unhappy, that really is something we would better, like smooth it out. How can it be that this catches us as a surprise, right? If we should see it all the time. We should not have to go to Stata to tell us that this is going on, right? So how is it possible that this is just all a surprise? And to answer this question, I analyzed expectations data in this German socioeconomic panel. So that's the data set that Ada already described today. And so I have 23,000 individuals observed between 1991 and 2009. And then they are asked the typical life satisfaction question: how satisfied are you with your life, all things considered? But on top of that, and that's very special, it's the only data set in the world that has it like for such a long panel data set, is how do you think you will feel in 5 years? So the life satisfaction in 5 years ahead. And the nice thing is, of course, because it's a panel, you can actually connect individuals' predictions to their later outcomes and really like construct individual forecast errors. So then the simple question is just like, how accurately are people predicting, the U shape? Okay, so let's look at it. So this is again the current life satisfaction. Let's start with young people, this age range, your age range. What do you think? What are we going to see here? Will it be lower, higher? Huh? It's higher, actually substantially higher. And people just think like, oh, and of course, this is just average effects, right? And probably you're all like you're like evil economists and you, whatever, have pessimistic outviews or realistic outviews or something. So maybe that explains it. But usually young people seem to just say, oh, I'm quite happy, but like, man, once I have a job and I'm free and whatever and make much money, then I will be so much better, right? So now what happens over time, so they don't anticipate sliding down the U shape, and they're like kind of fine, like, having this mismatch, because probably here they say, oh, I will be like a soccer superstar at 25. And they're not at 25, they say, oh, I will be whatever, like a startup millionaire or something. But at some point, like, exactly, they start to realize things turn out less nicely and expectations go down as well, right? And then here, in the middle part, this is really the part of the double misery, because on the one hand, you have had all these disappointments, right? At the same time, you lost all the rosy outlooks for the future, right? So this is kind of like the low point. And interestingly, it's really like this area where these two hit, where people like align the expectations with the current life satisfaction, that life satisfaction goes up again. And this actually comes to a pleasant surprise. So it seems to lie below there. And of course, like if you find such a pattern, like this is just averages, but I can control for stuff, it doesn't change. And if you find such a strong pattern, the first thing you think you made some kind of mistake, right? So you double check that. And then you want to see whether there's any explanation in like whatever other life sciences that could explain this kind of thing. And what's interesting is when you look at like in neuroscience psychology, there's actually a big literature on overoptimism, particularly for young people. And it seems to be caused by like biased information processing, the prefrontal cortex, so that there has been this team at UCL in London that took people and like asked them to update their prior or make predictions about the future, give new information and so on. They consistently kind of process positive information more correctly or accurately than negative information, but then they kind of like shocked the prefrontal cortex. I don't know the details how they did this, but they did this. I also don't know how they got the IRB approval for that, but it is published, and they think they have a paper in Nature and one in Science, so very highly published. And then people actually were making better forecasts and had got rid of this optimism bias. And so the idea here is that young adults typically think they'll beat the average. So, if like the guys of you who get married, they probably think, oh, I will have the lucky marriage, right? Like with the happy marriage, healthy children, I will have the good job, and so on. And of course, we immediately see this could be evolutionary efficient, right? So if you know that there's really a 1/3 chance that you're going to divorce, you're probably not even going to marry. Or if you know like how much pain children are, you would not have any, and that would not be very good for the human race. And that's also how they kind of like explain this. So we start off very optimistically, right, and like with a lot of drive, everything will be great and so on. But then as we age, life doesn't turn out as nicely as we hope, right? So maybe you will not get the nice job that you had in mind, or even worse, you get the nice job and all the money, but then you realize it's just like prestige and income isn't like as satisfying as you expected. So yeah, as I said, middle age then becomes this time of double misery, disappointment together with these evaporating expectations. So yeah, have fun, guys. But then at this bottom of the U-shape, when like people come to terms with their life, so it seems on the one hand, like people just like say, okay, that's it, I don't have like any higher aspirations. And what's really interesting is that there has been brain research by people in Germany, also published in Science, that shows that the aging brain learns to feel less regret about missed chances. So what they did was like they had young and old subjects play a game where they had to stop the game at some point. You say like, oh, no, now it's over. Like if they played too long, they could lose everything. So they make gains. At some point they probably say stop. And then the treatment was that they showed these subjects how much money they would have gained more if they would have played more, right? And the funny thing was, the young people, they were like outrageous. They were outrageous. They like had a heartbeat was going up. They were sweating, and they were like you could even see a brain reaction and so on. Old people, no reaction at all. They were just like totally fine with it. Except there was a subgroup of, I think, clinically depressed old people, and they behaved like the young guys. Like they didn't kind of learn how to do it, so they were just like constantly still getting angry about everything. And so this provides kind of like an explanation or like a hypothesis what's going on later on in life. Like you accumulate all this frustration, all this disappointment, but at some point you come to terms with it and you don't care so much about it anymore because you kind of like, again, evolutionally that also probably makes sense, right? We want to see young people who are driven, but we don't want to see the grandfather who's like still angry that he didn't get this job when he was 20 or something. So overall, it tells kind of like a story in which this midlife crisis or the age U-shape and life satisfaction is driven by these unmet aspirations that are like painfully felt in midlife, but then later in life like beneficially abandoned and also felt with less regret. And given that like the idea is this seems to be a biological story, we should also like kind of see it in different subgroups, right? Like we could check this. So one way to first summarize this pattern is, so here again is expected and current life satisfaction. In the right graph you see just the forecast error, just the difference of the two, right? So positive forecast errors when young, and then they cross zero, and then later on they have negative forecast errors. And now we can just look at subgroups, right? I'm, by the way, a big fan of figures. I'm not a big fan anymore of like long regression tables. I think like just doing subgroup analysis is better than controlling for a million things at the same time. So what you see here in the first figure is just the same pattern split up by different time periods. And you see the pattern in all the different years. It seems to be shifted up at 91 to 93, which is just after the German reunification, right? When people did have really wrong expectations because our big Chancellor Kohl told them like, everything will be great. And then also like in 98, 2002, this was just like around the new economy stock market bubble. It was like this boom time. And then people had like definitely expectations that didn't materialize that nicely afterwards. What's interesting here, this is East and West Germany, again after unification, and we see a very similar pattern, even though these are like culturally extremely different areas. Some might claim that's still the case, but at that time it certainly was. Males, females, also no difference. Low education, high education, the funny thing here is the high educated actually, if anything, make bigger mistakes. So we see here, it's not that much more, but we see it's like statistically a little bit more. And one hypothesis could be that, high educated people have also like more strongly hump-shaped education profiles, income profiles. So, they know they have higher increases, they might mispredict more like how much they like it, and they also they know they have higher decreases in retirement, and they might overpredict the pain of losing that money. Okay, and since we're economists, we don't only check whether the data is right and check whether there's a kind of biological explanation for it, but we also press it a little bit in math, and there one can actually write it down quite easily in a simple framework. So the idea here is that life satisfaction is a function of current life circumstances, and this here is just the forecast error, right, about the current period. And here we have some regret parameter. The stronger this thing is, the more you're like upset about missed chances. And the one thing that's interesting from this formulation that you don't immediately see from the data is like this feedback effect, which is imagine you just get what you expected, right? This is 0, then you're in equilibrium, like you just have like the current life circumstances. But then imagine you get a little bit less than you expected, right? That means that this term is positive, right? Meaning that you will have on top of the these life circumstances have this negative term here, which decreases life satisfaction. But life satisfaction is here as well, right? Meaning you will get even more disappointed, right? And in the end, you feel disappointed about being disappointed, right? And it can be that even if everything is fine, right, you can be in this kind of vicious circle with a strong feedback effect, where just like the presence of a small initial disappointment can really like make you feel worse and worse about your life. And this is also in line with like a lot of anecdotal evidence and so on that I've discussed with people, where like people say, hey, I don't even know why I'm so unhappy, and that actually makes me even more unhappy because they can't talk to people about it and they just feel like, you know, ungrateful for the unhappiness. Expected life satisfaction I just model to be life satisfaction with some kind of like optimism parameter, which is just like depending on age. So we observe, of course, these two terms, and then I assume, just like for the simulation, that the current life satisfaction, life circumstances are constant, right? Meaning, like, let's see if we can generate this pattern even if life circumstances are completely constant over time. And then we can estimate these regret and optimism parameters, which then, you know, are supposed to give us the pattern that we see. And that's the optimism parameter here is over age is surprisingly linear, right? It's really just like this function here, yeah. So I just like solve for the omega there. So it's just this linear, very simple linear negative optimism profile. And here the regret parameter, we have something that like at young ages, I mean, it's kind of 0, but it's all over the place, and then it gets increases, you know, at middle ages when like people are more and more disappointed about all the unmet expectations, and then in old ages goes down again. And so in the end, I just kind of like parameterize these two parameters, just like here with this linear thing, and here I just use like this normal fit, and then we see that we can fit very well these actual patterns that we see in the data. And of course, I mean, that doesn't prove that this is the actual causal model, but it just means that the argument makes sense. You know, we can make a very simple argument that with a very simple kind of like pattern of these parameters, which actually predicts, I don't know, like 98% or something of the actual pattern. Okay, so overall it seems that the midlife, or also often people think of it in terms of mid-career dissatisfaction, is not a silly crisis, but more of a developmental, like a normal developmental stage, something we all go through, and it seems to be rather driven by biology than by job or living circumstances. And so that suggests that like drastic changes, and yeah, remember this when you feel when you find yourself in the depth of dissatisfaction. Drastic life changes might not really be helpful. So if we have, like, let's say, we have the burned out Wall Street lawyer and the frustrated NGO activist, if they change jobs, probably they will probably just feel worse afterwards. So the question is then, you know, what should we do? Should we just like say, oh, we know it will go up again? We saw this, whatever, 20 years ago in this slides, and that's it. I think, I mean, it's good that it goes up again. That's actually like, it's one option, right? but I think there's more we can do. First, one way to kind of solve the problem would just be to get rid of the optimism, right? But of course we don't want to do this, and we probably also can't do this, right? I mean, that's the thing about the young people, right? You tell them like you're stupid, you're wrong, but they do it anyhow, right? They won't believe it, and we don't want to change that. But what we can do, I think, is intervene in midlife, right? And think about like how can we help people suffering in the midlife crisis? How can we help them to feel better? And I think here an important part, and this is kind of the part about this feedback, the feedback that I showed in the mathematical model, is that already telling people that this phenomenon is normal and there's nothing to be like embarrassed about, this already can be therapeutic, right? And also the fact that it's only transitory. And so it provides a light at the end of the tunnel. You know, it will go up again eventually. And then especially, you know, if you hear that it's okay to feel upset, then you are less upset about feeling upset. And overall, I think like this would be kind of the overall policy for society, that we should maybe try to get rid of the term midlife crisis, because the midlife crisis tells us like something is completely wrong, and it also suggests that this is just a very short thing, or just like a thing of like, you know, a crisis really sounds not something like a developmental stage that might last several years, but it sounds something like, oh my God, you're feeling horrible today, we have to change something about it, right? So I think, yeah, if there was more of a discussion about this and more of a, like an acknowledgement, not about like, oh, how can we get happy, but more like, hey, maybe it's fine, you know, to be a little bit gloomy in these middle years, and it will pass, and it's actually normal, and you're not alone, then things might already improve because of that. Okay, so this was the little summary of the paper. Are there any questions? Yeah?
Yes, what you showed us were for each age the mean of that group, right?
Yeah.
But so how much dispersion is there within each age group? Basically, should I be sure that this will happen to me?
This is, yeah. No, this is that's an important point. I think like, yeah, actually right now, I want to say this in any empirical study, actually, you know, that has kind of like meaning for people. Of course, these are just like average, and any path can go, it can go in any possible direction. So I've been working so long on this thing that of course I always ask myself, well, what do I think about 5 years? And as you will see in the next part of the thing, there have been a lot of unmet expectations in both directions with this paper. So no, it can go in either direction, in all the ways. And of course, this is also kind of like, you know, you have these discrete steps, it's like 8, 9, 10, and so on, how the life satisfaction is measured. So already because of that, you know, you have kind of like different groups, and this is just like the average. But I think it is just already the idea that, you know, we hear about a lot about midlife crisis. It is kind of in the public realm, and this is kind of just matching that. Yeah, but it's always important, of course. It's like the R square is not 1. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you. So, how does this midlife crisis relate to the age profiling productivity? So, if I'm right, it's increasing up till what, 40?
So. I think like, yeah, I don't know exactly right now the productivity profile. I mean, wages are increasing, right? But I guess a lot of this is kind of tenure and experience. But if we look, for example, at antidepressant medication and like, you know, like mental health problems, it's actually hump-shaped. It's like very similarly, just like mirrored, which is often taken as kind of like a more objective way that really people feel depressed and things are not going well. And the idea there is, I mean, I had one more slide. I thought, you know, I wouldn't go through so quickly. But one question is, which is particularly interesting for like managers, businesses, and so on, is like, what can firms do? And the idea there is that there's a lot about like mentoring, especially like in modern firms, but mentoring is always that these young guys who just start working, they are mentored by older guys. But there's no mentoring for like those at middle ages, right? And what you often read is like, oh, if you're frustrated at middle ages, turn to the young and mentor them. But like that's completely wrong, you know, because you just get more frustrated. So what you should do, you should be mentored by the oldest guys in the firm, who then tell you like, hey, relax, things will be fine, and maybe don't be so angry about the things that didn't work out. And by this, you know, this is kind of like a a change in mindset, and this could save a lot of money potentially, because this is also mental health issues are really the number one prime health problem in our societies in terms of productivity, because these are the ones that strike you in midlife, and usually that, like, if you look at, for example, absentee rates, like physical health problems, people leave 1 or 2 days. Mental health problems, people are gone for a month or longer. Yes?
Recently, a friend of mine is working at the European Commission. They have reverse mentoring schemes, where basically young people mentor older people.
Okay. Well, that seems very kind of like mixed up. So I haven't thought about the implications of that yet, but I think they could be counterproductive. But yes.
Yeah. So about this slide in particular, in which you were saying that one of the things that we can think of is how to intervene during the midlife crisis to sort of put these people in a better mood. But it seems like the unhappiness that these people are feeling is also a result of a lot of years of potentially overestimating how happy they should be. So it seems like the problem happens a lot before the actual midlife crisis. So I was wondering whether you could somehow, so I was thinking of this literature in education that looks at the importance of non-cognitive skills, because basically the model of education nowadays is like you should boost your cognitive skills and you'll succeed in life. When that doesn't happen, then you get this lull in motivation or happiness. So I was wondering if this could actually be taught a little better, because it's not just a matter of how different your expectation is to your reality, but how you evaluate yourself ex ante. So you think you're going to succeed because you're investing all this time in your cognitive abilities, but then you're leaving this other whole part of your productivity behind. And when it comes into play, then it's too late. So I was wondering whether you have any thoughts on that.
So I think in general, like, kind of like training these non-cognitive skills, for example, mindfulness is like a really big topic. I think in Harvard Business School, they have a whole section on mindfulness right now, so it also seems to sell well. But I definitely think, like, kind of like expectations handling can be good, in particular, like in a very competitive society like the US, where they all fight against each other and so on, Maybe in Spain it might be a little bit less of a problem, where like people are, like more pro-social or something often. I mean, I remember like writing exams in undergraduate here, where you like give your exam sheet to the guy next to you when you are done, so that person has help. And then I had to proctor these exams. It was a really difficult time for me as a PhD student. Okay, but the thing is just, I think like if we are in societies that are like overly competitive and people are like, it's not just about being youthful and driven, but they are overdriven and maybe they take ADHD drugs to like, brain doping and all these things, then I'm sure it would be a good idea maybe also to dampen that. But on the other hand, just like, like a natural, healthy optimism is probably not bad. And I mean, that's what I hear with people.
You don't want to cut that too early either, because this probably will just disincentivize you from...
Yeah,
I know it's a tough balance, but I was wondering if there is any connection with that literature.
Yeah, but I mean, so far I think like often people bring up some like mindfulness and so on. So do we know what is the time? It's still half time? Okay. Okay, great. What's the question in the back? The question? Oh, yeah?
Yeah, regarding the graph you showed us of the unconditional means of either perception of happiness and expectation. You said you control for a lot of stuff, but I would be very surprised if, like, controlling for kids, the number of kids, if that shape doesn't change at least something, because.
And so, I mean, of course, like always, when you control for covariates, like things move a little bit, but the overall pattern is the same. Like it doesn't change in any way, like substantially, that you would have a different conclusion. And all of these ones, I don't control for anything there. It's just really the raw averages, but one could, I have like in the paper, robustness checks where I control for these common suspects. And it is, in fact, like interesting that like, it's not just driven by children.
Okay.
So, yeah.
How do you deal with exit rates? So people that have more expectations when they're young, they commit more risky behavior, so they're probably out of the sample. But then people that have lower expectations, they also like out because they have been like having these negative shocks persistently. So it might be a natural solution in the ingredient because
I mean, the thing is, like, if you look at mortality rates, the good news, even though you guys are young and do stupid things, mortality rates are extremely low. At the same time, at older ages, mortality, of course, increases exponentially. And so if you try to match it, it just doesn't work. You know, like, of course, you could, for example, think, oh, maybe this is here, people, you know, it's the average prediction of how well they do. The ones that do worse die. But then we should see like a spread like this or something, exactly. So yeah, it doesn't seem to be a big issue. And I think the German socioeconomic panel, they put quite a lot of effort to follow up, I mean, as good as they can. So yeah. Okay, so I think we are done with this part. Now some more background on the proceedings of this whole thing. So when I was in my second year, and you know, you have to think about how to do research and like what topic to pick and so on, I was really wanted to find something new. Like first I thought I would do like macroeconomics. I did like TA macro 1, TA macro 2, and at some point I was like, hey, I really want to do something completely different. And I was like searching around for some months. I looked into like institutional economics, economic history. At that point, it wasn't part of the curriculum yet. Heterodox economics. And then I came across like really fascinating slides from Robin Memorial's lecture of Richard Layard, who's a Sir Richard Layard at LSE. And he's called the happiness czar of the UK government. And here you see him with the Dalai Lama, like discussing happiness probably. And he had these very inspiring slides that I read, and I thought like, wow, this is it. Like, I have to do happiness economics. In particular, what I found fascinating was the idea that, you know, in all of the models, in particular, like all these macro models, we always have the small u, right? The utility is always the most important thing, right? Max u, right? However, what I realized there is like we never measure u, right? Measuring u or like trying to touch u is like a taboo. It's like u is the central thing, but we are not allowed to talk about it. And then I thought like, hey guys, if we have like all these surveys around with happiness and so on, and this seems to be a proxy for this little u, that could be very interesting. So I had very high hopes. And then I was looking around for mentors, and a very natural supervisor was Robin. Thanks for coming. Because like in his class was actually the only class where we discussed assumptions, you know, and of course like discussing assumptions in micro 1 when you have like all of Musculal's book to go through is a hard task. But in Robin's class, this was not only encouraged, but it was actually part of the curriculum, you know, discussing like where that makes sense, the assumptions that we have in all the models that we use. And then I also looked around like, oh, who does happiness? Is there anyone close by? And then I was extremely excited to find Ada as one of the
Taken actual pictures.
No, but these were the pictures when I first met you, and I don't think it has changed so much. So But the great thing was really that Ada was like one of the leading happiness experts. And I was actually thinking like, oh, I've never met her, and like, why is she doing this? You know, I almost felt already a little bit of the competitiveness. I'm like, I want to do it. Now there's this person at Autonoma who seems to be like famous for that. But then I took the train. I took the train many times since then. And I explored that there are green parts of Barcelona, so that was very nice. And Ada said like, oh great, welcome, nice that you're interested in happiness. And she gave me the immediate access to the ZEP, probably also kind of like was a little bit of a shortcut, but I signed a contract at some point later, a user contract. But she immediately allowed me to work on the socioeconomic panel. Then also quite importantly, she also taught me Stata, like she taught me like how to go from row n to n-1 and the other way around. So, and it was very fascinating. And what was really cool then that I found this variable, this expected life satisfaction. Okay, you have it +1, but it's like the one +5, you know, like with the next period. I found this in the data set and I was like, wait a moment, this is a really cool variable because we make our decisions based on u, right? I mean, this is kind of what we maximize. But of course, it is not realized u, it's expected u, right? So this thing is actually really what is in all our models, right? What you expect for the future. So yeah, so the SOIP was at that time still like this kind of raw data set that you had to program and had to write in the end like 80 pages and so on. And the thing was like, I was running out of time, you know this problem. And I had this whole idea about like analyzing expected life satisfaction and so on, but it was like all going totally over my head. And so the time was up, or like a week before or something, I realized it's not going to happen, so I have to come up with something else. And this was the title that I presented here in June 2008, Feeling Small, the Endogeneity of Self-Reported Body Height. No joke. The idea there was like I looked at like errors in like reported body height and whether it correlated with like changes in income or something. So I presented it, and Robin probably thought it was a joke, and his response was failed. So he said like, Hannes, you can do better than that, and this is not acceptable. I think I also submitted it like the day after it was due in the morning, and yeah, it was kind of a disaster. So he said, you have a second chance, you have the long summer in front of you, so work hard, and then we're going to see again in the fall. So in the fall I presented second attempt, testing the rational expectations hypothesis over stages and states of life. It was the first title of many titles of the paper that I presented in the end. So this was now here in October, and Robin was pleased. Ada was also drawn in as a reader, and even somebody as critical as Sergi gave his thumbs up. So I was cleared, and very happy about that. So with this spirit, I thought, oh, let's like spread the news and like discuss with more people and so on. So what did I do? I went to the macro lunch in Cray. I think you guys were there, right? Yeah. Well, the thing is, this was their reaction. There was literally, it was there were like two young visiting professors, macroeconomists, and they literally laughed. They laughed, looked around, they asked me like, why on earth should we ever care about expected life satisfaction? I was like, okay, good. But it was like definitely also a very good fail there. I have to say though, but like it was like, I think 3/4 of the talk was done, and Jordi Gali, he was sitting at the back on this like nice black sofa, and at some point he was like, I think that's interesting, and can you go one back, show me this figure again? And then these guys who laughed, they also said like, oh, it's interesting or something, but like it was too late. I knew their real opinion. So yeah, so that was kind of a pushback, but at the same time I asked Robin to write to the Lord of Happiness, right, at LSE. So Robin sent him an email saying, Oh, so, no, I think he's the Lord.
He's a Lord?
Yeah, he's the Lord. And his wife is a baroness, and they're the only couple ever living in existence that both have their titles in their own right. So a very accomplished person. And he said, I like your ELS analysis, so why don't you come to LSE with the European doctoral program? And what was also good that was he was the founder of the Center for Economic Performance like 30 years ago, so he gave me a desk there, which was really nice. And yeah, so I was kind of like in high spirits. I will go to LSE, great, and so on. I had this paper, so I thought, let's submit it, right? And like, let's submit it to Economic Journal. This guy was the editor, Steve Pischke, and his answer was desk rejection. Yeah. And now looking back at this, his answers, desk rejection was actually quite nice. So he wrote this cover letter, and then he wrote actually kind of a whole page of a report explaining whatsoever. But I was extremely embarrassed, and I thought like, this is really bad. This guy hates me, whatever. And I was like, I was really kind of like emotionally upset about that. I even sent it there and so on. Okay, but still I had this good thing ahead going to LSE. So at my first day at LSE, Richard Layard comes and says, hey, let's go have lunch, all right? But on the way to the lunch, he said, like, wait one moment. I have to introduce you to your supervisor. It's a really good guy. And he brought me to the office of Steve Pischke. And I was like, no, I was literally I was considering for a moment just to run away, right? And I didn't. And it turned out that like, it took me like a few more months to understand kind of like his signals, but like he actually thought it was nice that I submitted the paper, and he still thought it wasn't that good and so on, and we still disagree on that, but But no, but it was like really productive, and yeah, and he became then like my main supervisor at LSE together with Robin, and I learned a lot from him. And it was also just a year after he came out with his like mostly harmless econometrics, and this kind of really was eye-opening for me. Okay, so he also like pushed me to work on a big kind of project, how to integrate life satisfaction in the life cycle model. I worked on this for 6 months, like day and night, like really, really hard. Presented it twice in the seminar there, and unfortunately it didn't work out. Like it's really like, I have all these folders there, and like there's nothing that I have ever done with it, because in the end, like I tried everything, and at some point Steve just like shook his head and said like, okay, let's move on. And yeah, and I don't know, looking back, I don't know, like I somehow like just moved on, but yeah, just like for me, sometimes I tell my students now, look, you can actually spend enough time, but if it doesn't work, you just move on. Then I looked at wealth shocks in the HRS, and I wanted actually to look at happiness, but the happiness measures are not good, but the health measures are good, so I turned over to health, which wasn't such a bad idea because health is of course much broader, and that became my job market paper and landed me this job at a postdoc in Princeton with Janet Curry, and at the Center for Health and Wellbeing. And so I was happy that there was also some like well-being part there, but I knew like my happiness paper is like the first chapter, and like I really had other things to care about. How am I doing on time? 35. Okay, 35 minutes, okay. Okay, so I thought, you know, like I put this aside, work on my health stuff, but then there came this IZA conference around in November 2012, and I met this guy, who knows who that is? Andrew Oswald from Warwick, and I told him about this happiness paper, and he really liked it. He was like, wow, that's impressive, it's like really new stuff, that's cool, and so on. And he's a very inspirational person, and I was of course very happy about it, because but not only because he is just a very famous happiness researcher, but also because he was a science editor at that time, or like an associated editor. And the best part of the story was he said like, oh, you should submit it to Science, right? So suddenly I was like, oh my God, like a solicitation from Science. So what did I do? I stopped everything else, literally, and sat down like for 1.5 months, and I read a lot of science papers to learn the style, rewrite everything, and so on. And like really took quite some time, and Ada and Robin had to look over the drafts again, as many other people. I submitted it. It got under review, which is kind of like, it was a really big thing. It was like this time when I like checked every day, you know, my email whether there's an answer, but then it got rejected. And it apparently didn't get into the hands of Andrew Oswald, and like unlucky, but I was quite happy that it actually got under review. So I thought like, wow, that's cool. So there's this other cool science journal around PNAS. So I, again, learned about the PNAS style, I rewrote it, submitted it, and this was a desk rejection, right? So that was a little bit like, I already thought like, hey, what should I do? This paper, you know, is costing me a lot of time. It was like a nice try, but like, it's kind of a waste of a time, right? I mean, I was up for review soon again when I have to go to the job market again and so on. So better do some other stuff. However, I took the science version and made it a working paper. Like, you cannot do this if you've submitted to Science. They don't want you to have it around as a working paper. I just took this paper, and it was really like, the nice thing about Science is like you write these very short articles, right? Just like 3-4 pages. So it was a very, very compressed version. And it was, I published it through the CEP at LSE, and they have some connections to journalists, and somehow the day before, it came out on Monday, and on Sunday, the Sunday Times had like this big article about the study, and what they had done, they had looked at this, wait, where is this, the graph? Here the graph, looked at this graph, and then they went somehow and said, it's not even actually really true, but they said somehow that 23 and 69 are the highest ages for happiness or something, and I don't know what it's like. These numbers apparently are more credible because they're not round or something. And somehow like this whole thing went super viral, and this is what happens over the next kind of like week or 2 weeks. So it was really like Time wrote a thing about it, and the Atlantic and Financial Times and so on, and even like here, this is one of the Spice Girls, I think it's Mel B or something. She claimed she had read the study. And there she says, like, it must be true because it was published in London, and that's why the guy is laughing there. But it was really suddenly, you know, like I got all these rejections, but suddenly...
That's why you only did graphs. So you could understand.
Exactly. Yeah, but I'm not so sure whether... He admitted that he hadn't read it. But suddenly, like, there was like this whole interest in the stuff, and I still hadn't achieved anything from an academic point of view, but there was this whole interest, which was nice. And another really nice unexpected outcome was that, like, I had this project with Janet Curry at the time, which was kind of also general interest, and she was like, oh, where should we submit it? It's not really clear whether economists like it. And then I told her, hey, I just spent like 3 months rewriting things and so on for science and PNAS, and then I rewrote it for PNAS, we submitted it, and this got in like within 4 weeks or something, which was like my first publication and like a really big deal. So yeah, I was in good spirits again, so I said, let's try the happiness paper again, right? So the annoying thing is, it came from an economics paper, made into a science paper, like short and precise. But now I had to stretch it out again, like a chewing gum, you know, put all the like appendix back in because I wanted to make it a science paper again, like an economics paper. And I submitted in these places. AR actually got under review. I was very happy about this, but they rejected. Restart test rejection. Then Andrew Usward told me these are like acknowledged general interest journals. I should try that. But that was all like like a big fail. It took me like months and like rewriting, resending, waiting, hoping, and so on. So rejections over rejections. Meanwhile, we had another paper that we also put to PNAS because it worked so well, and it worked well again. So that was a very good trade for me. And another nice thing was like that at some point Harvard Business Review called me and they're like, hey, you have this whole thing on midlife crisis, can you write an article? And I wrote something, and in the end they made it kind of like the main headline of the website for 2 days or something, and it was like the most read article or whatever. Like it was kind of really big, and then people like from the whole world wrote me like, oh, thank you, you helped me so much, I felt depressed, but now I feel so much better, and so on. And I was like, wow, it's so great to be an economist and to help people on the other end of the ocean, except the only problem that I still haven't published it, right? And like, yes?
And I was just wondering, why didn't you never consider psychology journals? Like, I think psych science, that sounds like psych science to me.
No, the thing about psychology journals, they're really into RCTs, so they really want like experiments, and there was like nothing experimental there. So I thought about that, but I also was kind of like, I was finished with rewriting this thing for other fields, and I wasn't so much into that thing anymore. But yeah, so these were like kind of uplifting experiences on the side. So I thought, oh, I rewrote the paper so much, let's send it to Economic Journal again, right? Steve Pischke had gone by that time. He said like, hey, hadn't you submitted already? I was like, yes, it was so different, you just couldn't, the title was, everything was different. So I submitted again, it gets under review, but then it gets rejected. And the funny thing is, the reason for the rejection is that the one referee and then the editor also said, I don't show the pattern within individuals, right? Like that because what I had shown you so far was more just the average pattern, not within individuals. But I had gotten this criticism before, and in that version that I submitted, I had done the individual level comparison, and actually, I've not only done this, I have mentioned it big time in the intro, the data, the methods. I really checked it. I wrote the editor later on an email, but already I had submitted it somewhere else. But it was really everywhere in there, and I thought like, this is not only my failure, but also like Economic Journal, a big time failure. And it's really like, yeah, you just shake your head, and you will have something in your life as well, where you just think, and actually now thinking back, I think I should have written, it was such a clear case that I could have written him before submitting it somewhere else and saying like, you know, maybe reconsider it. But on the other hand, people say, you know, then they just hate you, and there's no point of doing that. So actually, when I looked at it yesterday, well, because I wanted to check the details there, and I realized that the guy who was the editor at that time, like I know him now quite well, and we are kind of friends. But I had forgotten that it was him, and probably it was good that I didn't start a big fight over that thing. And you don't know, you know, like he sends it out to somebody else, and it will just get rejected again. But yeah, one more rejection. However, finally, Jibo got me a revise and resubmits. I couldn't believe it. I was like extremely happy that this happened. So I was working on the revision, and then finally in spring 2016, it got out. And at the same time, I also finally got my science article that I always wanted. and also also like a lot of coverage and so on. So that was a good few months there. Okay, so let's think about the bottom line. I think when like people reflect on like their jobs or their career, they often tend to like just glorify all the cool things they do. But I think the truth is that a lot of that stuff is always luck, and just like afterwards you say, oh, it was so good and so on. But it's a lot of luck. But it's not only good luck, but also bad luck, of course, right? And I think there are things we can do to try to fight to get some of the good draws, right? Because you will get the bad draws anyhow, but just have to go on to get the good draws. And what would these be? So one thing I think is really good is to seek novelty, in whatever field you're working in, just try to do something new. And people really appreciate this, and in particular the really good people, because the senior people, they know how much, how limited everything is, the established wisdom and so on. They know that like if you come up and say like, hey, I want to do something different, they really value that. But you should do it passionately, because you will be stuck a long time with it. And if you don't believe in it actually, then it's just a waste of time. You better do something where you really believe in, and if it's new, that's really great. So if you have this, then find people to support you. Yeah, don't believe that you can just go out there and be smart and brilliant. Then you will just be beaten up by the middle guys, who want to do careers, and they're going to hate you. The better your paper is, the more they will hate you, right? So you need to find like established people who support you and who say like you're good, and who kind of shield you from the I don't know, the sharks around you, right? Then aim high, just try the biggest. I think like in retrospect, submitting this kind of like funny happiness midlife crisis to Science as a single author was kind of like, what was I thinking, right? But at the end, it was of course like very useful for me. Then you fail, right? You saw a lot of fails. I think like, yeah, a lot of red fails in the presentation. And then you try again. And of course, look for opportunities on the way. I mean, I think this was, for me also, like when I was reflecting this, I thought like, what should I tell you? And I thought like, this is I don't know, it was a good story, because there are also like so many failures and like so many rejections. That's something, and by now actually when I get a rejection, you really don't care anymore. It's like really amazing. Like you care less and less. You're just like, oh, boring, you idiots or something.